Now we get to see how the Bush family fell in with the Harrimans and the Rockefellers. Many are aware that former U.S. President George W. Bush is an alumnus of the Skull and Bones fraternity. His father, George Herbert Walker Bush, was a member too, as was his father, Prescott Bush. It was at Yale University that Prescott Bush became close friends with Averell Harriman, the son of E.H. Harriman, who was also a bonesman. But the Bush-Harriman family connection actually goes back a bit further. Prescott's father was Samuel Bush, who would have been George W.'s great-grandfather. Samuel Bush was general manager and later president of Buckeye Steel Castings, a factory in Ohio controlled by the youngest brother of John D. and William Rockefeller, Frank Rockefeller. Buckeye Steel Castings made munitions and railroad hardware, the latter of which it sold to an associate of the company, E.H. Harriman. E.H. Harriman's son Averell had little interest in railroads, and instead of following in his father's footsteps after graduating from Yale, he decided to go into investment banking, forming W.A. Harriman & Company. He enlisted his friend Prescott Bush to join the company as a partner, and chose George Herbert Walker to serve as the bank's president. Walker was a well-connected investment banker in his own right, who was one of the directors at the American International Corporation. The year prior, Bush had married Walker's daughter, Dorothy. Their son, George Herbert Walker Bush, was of course named after Dorothy's father. Finally, we get to see where Brown Brothers fits into this quilt. After the crash of 1929, Brown Brothers merged with Harriman's Bank to become Brown Brothers Harriman. Time magazine announced the merger in 1930, noting that 8 of the 10 initial partners of Brown Brothers Harriman were all Skull and Bones alumni. In the decade following the merger, Brown Brothers Harriman played a central role in funneling U.S. investments to Nazi Germany. Funds were transferred through the Union Banking Corporation, an affiliate bank set up by Harriman and an early Nazi supporter, Fritz Thyssen. The recipient of the bulk of these transfers was the IG Farben Company in Germany, the corporate muscle behind Adolf Hitler. IG Farben was run by its co-founder, Max Warburg, at least until anti-Jewish policies made it impossible for Max to remain in Germany. Rockefeller's Standard Oil of New Jersey also helped the Nazis prepare for war, providing IG Farben with a formula for making aviation fuel from coal, for example. Standard Oil escaped any serious repercussions from their cooperation with the Nazis, but UBC wasn't so lucky. The Union Banking Corporation was busted under the Trading with the Enemy Act and its assets seized. Many accounts of the scandal sidestepped the involvement of Harriman and Bush, but UBC's offices were in fact located in the Harriman Building at 39 Broadway in New York, and Prescott Bush and Averell Harriman's brother Roland were both directors at Union Banking Corporation. You can find their names listed here on vesting order number 248, filed with the Federal Registry in 1942 in conjunction with the seizing of the bank's assets. Another major player in the funding of Nazi Germany was the powerful law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell. One of Sullivan and Cromwell's important early clients had been Standard Oil, and the firm had also helped J.P. Morgan facilitate his General Electric and U.S. Steel mergers. 2 senior partners at Sullivan and Cromwell during the years leading up to World War II were John Foster Dulles and his brother, Allen Dulles. Not only were the Dulles brothers instrumental in the transfer of U.S. capital to pre-war Nazi Germany, they helped their clients, Brown Brothers Harriman and Standard Oil, try and hide their Nazi connections, albeit with limited success. Allen Dulles is truly a titanic figure in modern American history. He ran the OSS, which was America's intelligence arm during World War II, and the predecessor of the CIA. One of his brainchilds was Operation Paperclip, whereby German scientists and intelligence operatives were brought back to the U.S. after the war. Dulles sat on the board of J. Henry Schroeder Bank, one of the original investor banks in the Federal Reserve System, and a bank which was also instrumental in Nazi funding. Dulles also served as president of the Council on Foreign Relations from 1947 to 1950. The prevailing wisdom is that the father of the CIA was Wild Bill Donovan. Donovan was an important figure, but the title really should go to these 3 men. In particular, the third architect of the Defense Act of 1947, Allen Dulles. Now that we've crossed that hurdle, what is it that the CIA was really designed to do? As the 20th century progressed, corporate America increasingly became involved overseas. The AIC Guarantee Trust Coalition was the catalyst for this growth, and they came to control no less than 200 multinational corporations involved in everything from the manufacture of machinery to international shipping to agriculture and mining. Frank Vanderlip stated, "The way we conceived the American International Corporation, we had decided that what was needed was some kind of organization that would take a foreign business enterprise of great possibilities, or even a good idea with management behind it, and finance it into strength." Over the decades, the face of Wall Street changed as companies merged, changed names, and vied for dominance, but the model forged by AIC and Guarantee Trust, one of global commerce directed from select boardrooms, continued. By the mid-20th century, the scope and breadth of this commercial empire was reminiscent of that of the Dutch and British East India Companies in earlier centuries. But there was a major difference. The Dutch and British East India Companies did their own dirty work. They had gunships with which to enforce their monopolies. Corporate America in the 20th century didn't have gunships. They relied on the State Department to grease the wheels of international commerce, and diplomacy was often less than effective. That's where the CIA came in. It served as the attack dog for America's corporate elite, protecting their interests abroad. The CIA's first major operation was in Iran in 1953, ousting democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh in a coup d'etat. The benefactors of this coup in Iran were largely British oil interests, but the CIA's next adventure, a coup in Guatemala in 1954, protected the interests of United Fruit, a company which had grown large under the umbrella of the American International Corporation. Another flagrant example of the use of the CIA as a gunship of industry was its ousting of Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973. Allende was killed and replaced with Pinochet, one of the most brutal dictators in modern Latin American history. The coup in Chile was orchestrated largely in response to efforts by Allende to nationalize the country's copper mines and telegraph and telephone networks. This threatened the interests of IT&T as well as the mining giants Kennecott and Anaconda Copper. CIA interventions and coups around the world between the agency's inception and the First Gulf War averaged nearly one a year and included meddling in Ecuador, the Dominican Republic, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Brazil, Greece, Iraq, Zaire, Angola, Bolivia, Afghanistan, Honduras, and Haiti. The most infamous of CIA-backed coups was in resource-rich Indonesia in 1965, where Sukarno was overthrown by Suharto. After the takeover, Suharto's troops murdered over 500,000 alleged PKI party sympathizers with the aid of intelligence supplied by the CIA. The tragedy of all this chaos and killing is compounded when you factor in that much of it was paid for by U.S. taxpayers, hypnotized by the perceived communist threat and clueless as to how big business really pulled the strings in Washington and Langley, Virginia.